Welcome back to GCC Kids Connection, where we are connecting with each other while you're home from school. We're connecting with some really cool books, and most importantly, we're connecting with God's Word. We're so glad you're here.
Well, hi kids, welcome back. We're going to begin today with chapters 3 and 4 in our book called New Kid in Town. And if you were with us the last time, you know that our friend Fuzzle, a little skunk, very young skunk actually, got himself into a little bit of trouble because of his curiosity. So let's find out today. I think when we left the last time, he had finally gotten rescued from a crate. Now let's see what's going to happen to Fuzzle. Is he going to make it back to his mother and the rest of his family? Well, the first order of business after being freed from the crate was to find something to satisfy my gnawing stomach. This had to be done even before I started my search for my way home. I was sure that I must have traveled a long way, and in order to be able to walk the long distance back, I needed to have some proper nourishment. Mother had really just begun our training program. Up until a few days prior to my misadventure, she was still providing all of the nourishment that we needed, so I wasn't sure just what all was considered edible for a properly trained skunk. With my tummy growling and complaining, I decided that anything I could chew would do. The problem seemed to be to find that something. I set out, sniffing stiff and shaky. I sniffed the light breeze in the direction that I was headed, but no smell of food was in the air. I turned myself completely around, sniffing as I turned, and I still did not smell any food. I didn't know which direction I should head, so I just started out. Ahead, I could see some green things growing, tall trees and bushy shrubs. I hoped that it meant that woodland creatures would be close by and could tell a growing skunk where he could find food. My legs coaxed me into a trot. When I reached the edge of the forest, I plunged headlong into the underbrush, daring to hope that my noisy approach might scare up, not scare off, something for dinner. I was disappointed. There was not a stir. I slowed to a walk, sniffing to each side of me as I padded on. I smelled many things that were strange to me. Other animals surely lived nearby, I could tell by the scents. I wished that I could find one of them so I could ask them where the food supply was. As alive and fresh as the scents were, I never did come upon them. Once or twice I even noticed the stirring of the bushes or grasses very nearby, but I never was able to ask anyone. I walked on, deeper and deeper into the woods. I was about to give up when I came upon a wild strawberry patch. It had been well picked by larger creatures than I guessed, by the way the plants were trampled down. Whoever it was left a few berries here and there, and so I rushed around eagerly to collect them. A few of them had an ant or another insect to go along with the berry. It was a help, but scavenge as I did, it satisfied me very little. My poor tummy still grumbled, even after I gulped down every berry I could find. When I was convinced that I had eaten all the berries in the patch, I moved on. I did find a cricket or two as I passed down the trail, and a few grubs that lay around after a larger animal had turned over a log. I wandered on, my tired legs begging for a rest and my stomach pleading for more food. If only I could find something, even some water. Then I could fill my stomach with the liquid and perhaps convince myself that the water was enough to meet my needs. I looked up at the sky, and the moon had moved on to the west now, and like me, it appeared tired and ready to go to bed. Soon the sun would be waking, stretching, and calling out and wakening the birds and other daytime creatures. I needed to find a place where I could sleep. It was too late now to begin my search for Mother and the family. I would need to wait until the next time the moon climbed into the sky. I did wish that I could find a bit more to fill my empty stomach first, though. I hastened onward, willing my legs to keep on moving. The moon slipped away behind the western tree line, and the golden rays of the sun began to streak through the eastern sky, announcing that the sun itself would soon be making its daily appearance. There was no water. There was no food, and I needed rest and a place to hide away during the hours of the day. I pushed my nose into the grasses, licking drops of dew from the grass onto my thirsty lips. It was inadequate, but it was something. I chewed a few blades of grass. I couldn't remember Mother ever saying that grass was on our menu, but it was something to put in my stomach. I made faces as I swallowed the distasteful stuff and forced down a few more bites. I didn't know how any animal could stand such a diet. It was so most disagreeable. The dew that clung to the blades did help, though, to make it at least bearable. After I had eaten as much as I felt I could stand, I shook my head, choked down the last swallow, and decided to find a place to sleep. Oh, what I would have given to be tucked away in our cozy den. I had no idea where to look to find such a place. I wondered if one of the unseen animals that lived in the woodlands would be able to share theirs with me, just until I could find one of my own, or get home, of course. There was no one around to ask, and I had never felt so alone and deserted before. Why, I had always felt that the forest was the friendliest place one could be. Ours had always been stirring without activity and business. True, Mother and the rest of us pretty much kept to ourselves, but were very aware that there were other creatures around. Now it seemed that I was totally alone. Not another creature seemed to be stirring, either in the grasses or the branches. I couldn't decide which was worse, the hunger in my gnawing stomach or the loneliness in the gnawing of my heart. I began in earnest to search for a proper den, for the sun was telling me that it was way past my bedtime. I found nothing. Mother hadn't taught us yet how to go about finding and preparing a home. I was about to give up when I found a rotten log that didn't appear to be inhabited, so I crawled in. Now, a den should be lined with soft grasses and mosses that would give the bed a comfortable feeling, only I wasn't sure how to go about doing that. And even if I had known, there was no time now to go out searching for suitable bedding material. So I just curled up toward the back of the opening and attempted to go to sleep. The hollow log was almost as uncomfortable as the crate the night before. My bruised and aching bones and muscles protested against the hardness of my bed. The loneliness seeped all through me. I wanted to cry, but I would not allow myself to do so. If I just hung on, when the moon rose again, I would eat my fill, and then I would head for Mother and home. Even as I reasoned, grave doubts troubled my mind. I seemed to be all alone. I had no idea which way I should go. I could search for many nights and still not be any nearer to Mother. I was lost and alone, and in spite of my determination, a tear slid down from my eye and dropped on my paw. Then a blue jay screamed, scolding someone for some wrongdoing. It was a welcome sound, because it let me know that at least creatures did live around here. I sniffed back more tears, and then I curled up and went to sleep. I slept soundly throughout that day. I think that I must have tossed and turned in my sleep, for my hard bed looked as though it had been scuffled and scraped when I awoke. After, again, I was stiff and sore. I stretched my muscles and tried to flex the pain out, but it didn't work. I knew that I'd just have to live with it. Cautiously, I left my den with the foolish hope that my breakfast might be right outside my door. I didn't want to frighten it away before I had an opportunity to enjoy it. There was nothing there. I did have one pleasant surprise. 2 bush rabbits were playing a game of tag not too far away from my log, so I hurried forward eagerly, hoping to make their acquaintance, but at a sharp thump of their mother's hind foot, their heads snapped and they quickly darted for cover. A sadness filled me. I had so much wanted to talk to them. Why had they hurried off? It was almost as though they were purposefully avoiding me. Surely not. I had not done anything to offend them. Unless, of course, I had unknowingly slept in their den. Perhaps I should find another log. I didn't want any misunderstandings with new neighbors, especially when I needed their help to help me find my way home. But first, I needed to find something to eat and drink. I started off, my nose working as I went. I really didn't have very high hopes, I'm afraid, but I hadn't gone far when I thought I smelled water. I kept on going, and yes, definitely, it was water. I hurried on. I had to shift my direction some, because I was heading a little bit too far to the north. I might have missed it entirely had I not discovered my error. When I did get my bearings back, I found a small creek. Wow, what a welcome sight! I busied myself with finding a spot where I could reach the water without taking a bath at the same time. There was a rather well-worn path to the water's edge, and I proceeded along it. By stretching very carefully, not leaning too far, I was just able to get my tongue to the freshness of the water. How good it was to find water, and so close to my den as well. Then I reminded myself that I would not be going back there forever. I would be trying to find my way home, but I would need a water supply in the meantime. Well, it's nice to know anyway, I told myself, just in case I have to stay here for another night. Because of the clouds in the sky, the moon did not light my path very well. I had to travel almost totally by smell and instincts. It was difficult for me, though I felt sure that Mother would have been able to manage it quite well. I followed the creek and came to a small pond. It was very nice, but I really didn't have time to stand around admiring it. I must find some food, I told myself as I began to move away. But just then, a big splash sounded almost beside me. Another followed a short distance away. I stood very still, listening. Not a sound reached me through the stillness. I did not so much as even quiver. After some minutes into the silence came a croak. It was soon joined by another, and another, and another. From all sides of me were choruses. Frogs! I remembered my first night out with Mother. That night we had feasted on frogs. They were delicious. And here I had my breakfast right next to me. I smiled to myself in the darkness and thought of how good it was going to taste to have a full tummy after seeming to be hungry for so long. I moved slightly to get a better position for a feast and heard splashes all around me. The croaking ceased. I waited. The frogs waited. I thought that they would never croak again, and at last one did. But I could tell by the sound that it was way across the pond from me. It seemed a long way around to him, but I started out, and by the time I had reached the other side of the pond, 3 or 4 others had joined in his night song. I headed for what sounded like the biggest one. Just before I reached him, there was a big splash. It was me. In my hurry to get the frog, I had failed to notice the sharp drop-off of the bank, followed by splashes in all directions. I crawled disgustedly from the water, shaking my coat noisily. The frogs remained silent. I was annoyed at myself for getting all wet. I didn't like the feel of the wetness or the extra weight that it gave my fur. Busily, I went about trying to shake the water from me. At the same time, I waited for the frogs to begin croaking again. Time went on, and they still did not make a sound. I decided to stand very still and listen. It took a few minutes, but at last it happened. There was a croak, and then another, and another. But now it was coming from the other side of the pond. I heaved a heavy sigh and started back across. I traveled the whole distance only to be greeted with splashes just before I arrived where the frogs had been singing. Again, I was forced to wait, and again, when the frogs began to sing their song, they were way on the other side of the pond. Reluctantly, I started out again. Only splashes. I waited. More songs. Another trip around the pond. More splashes. I was getting very hungry by now, and the trips around the pond were not only making me hungry, but angry as well. Back and forth I went to be met by splashes and then silence. Not a frog moved or stirred near me. I finally realized that I was losing in this bid for breakfast, and I turned my back on the whole bunch of them. But before I went off, I heard another splash. I was sure that with each croak, they were laughing at me. Since frogs were not to be my breakfast, what would be? I decided to try for something that couldn't swim. It seemed to be my best bet would be to go back to the berry patch. I sniffed the air to see if I could detect one. I could smell nothing like a berry patch or anything really that was worth eating. I trudged on, sticking my nose into places where I thought a part of my meal might be. Generally, I was disappointed, though I did find a few crickets and an occasional grub. I was about to give up when I stumbled unexpectedly across an exciting discovery. The remains from someone's picnic lunch. There were crusts of sandwiches, 2 apple cores, a banana peel, some crumbs from a tasty cake, and a whole slice of watermelon. It was like a feast. By the time I was finished, I was quite satisfied. I decided to stop by the pond for another drink and then head back to my log. It was much too late now to start for home. Anyway, I still had not found someone to ask for help with directions. As I neared the pond, the frogs stopped croaking and began to dive into the water with even bigger splashes than before. It didn't bother me one bit. My tummy was full and I was content. They could sit there quietly as long as they wanted. They weren't bothering me. Just to be contrary, I waited until there was a deep croak right beside me, followed by another one on the other side, and then I reached out and splashed the water hard. Frantically, leaps exploded all around me, and the splashes in the pond were like a sudden rainstorm. I grinned into the darkness and trudged on home to my log. Well, Fuzzle has still not found his way back home. I wonder if he's ever going to find his way home. Well, today on your worksheet for chapters 3 and 4, there are some good questions for you to think about, maybe talk about with your parents. Here's one. Fuzzle knew there were other animals around, but why do you think he didn't see any of them? Why do you think that is? Or here's an interesting question. What doesn't Fuzzle know about himself? There's something kind of important about Fuzzle that he doesn't know about himself yet. Well, then in the middle section, some advice for Fuzzle. Remember at the end of chapter 3, Fuzzle said he didn't know which was worse, the gnawing in his stomach because he was hungry or the gnawing in his heart because he felt lonely. So what Bible verses or Bible truths could you share with Fuzzle that you think would be important for him to know? And then down at the bottom, some science questions for you to look up. Fuzzle's been trying to find a place to live, and he's been trying to find things to eat. So why don't you look up and find out what is it that skunks really do eat, and what kind of home do they live in? So have fun with those questions until we get together again to find out if Fuzzle is ever going to make it back home to his mom. See you next time.